Welcome to another episode of the Pre-Zero Sports Talk. Today we're exploring a crucial and personal topic for many who love the outdoors, conservation. I'm thrilled to have Jason Crighton here with us today. Jason's journey from a nature-loving kid in the northern woods of Pennsylvania to a dedicated environmentalist, educator, and outdoorsman is inspiring. He's the host of the award-winning Conservation Unfiltered podcast and the founder of Conserve the Wild, a nonprofit that tackles the challenges of urbanization. We'll unpack the real impact of hunting, the challenges of urbanization, and why everyone should care about conservation. So let's get started. Welcome to the show, Jason. How are you?
Good. How are you?
Excellent. I'm really good. You know, when we think about conservation, it's easy to view it as a modern issue, but the roots goes way back, Jason. I'm curious about what's the origins of the conservation movement in the United States?
Oh, well, if you want to, if you want to go way back, I mean, it really starts with first human contact here on the continent. But conservation, really, as we know it today, really started in the late 1800s with the rise of industry, the rise of lumber mills, clear cutting
Mhm.
entire swaths of forests, and then using basically taking out every animal that you possibly could, and seeing these naturalists, like Theodore Roosevelt and John Muir, two totally different ways to go about it, but both of them seeing the need to try to conserve the wildlife that we have and trying to conserve the landscape that we have. So really late 1800s that really picked up a whole lot of steam in the 1920s.
Yeah. And how have historical conservation efforts shaped policies mainly through outdoor sports like hunting and fishing?
So we use those recreational consumptive sports as a way to manage wildlife populations here in the United States. And traditionally, that worked very well because there were a lot of people, especially when it came to hunting, that were involved in it. We've seen a decline in participation, so that hasn't worked quite as well. But as far as policy is concerned, there have been calls from hunters themselves, that said like, "Hey, we need to fund these agencies that we have in the early going." So, hunters and fishermen actually called for a tax on the equipment that they
Mm.
use to then go into a big pot in the federal government. And then based on a whole number of factors, but mainly how many people participate in either fishing or hunting in a state and the land mass of that state, a percentage of that fund goes to each state in their state agencies. They can use that for different projects and different things that they need to do to support wildlife and things of that nature.
Yeah. Can you share a story about a pivotal moment in America conservation history that still resonates today?
Well, I think probably the one that most people would think about or notice today is just our national park system. Not just that, but also our national forests that we have, all the
Mm.
federal land that we have that's utilized for recreation here in the United States. That all stemmed from what Theodore Roosevelt did during his presidency. He established the first national forest. He established the Forest Service that we have today. He established the first sort of like bird sanctuary, wetlands national area. And by starting that, right, like it doesn't happen unless it starts. So by him starting a lot of that stuff, that has really shaped a whole industry here in the United States.
Yeah. Hunting and fishing are often misunderstood or have an unfair reputation, but there is another side to it that's not discussed enough. Jason, let's clear up some things here. Why are hunting, trapping, and fishing vital tools for conservation?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, it keeps the uh, wildlife in check, right? It helps to manage the populations. A lot of people like to think that nature takes care of itself, and it does. If you get an overpopulation, there is an overpopulation of white-tailed deer in especially the eastern United States. If you just let them go, and don't hunt them, then yeah, I mean, nature's going to take its course, and the too many deer that are there are going to die. But it's going to be a long, slow, painful death for them, most of the time of starvation or disease. And the people that see that, they don't want to see that, right? So hunters are then able to take some off of the landscape. It's much quicker. And, me personally, probably biggest reason why I hunt is because I utilize the meat. I love eating the meat, and I love the cooking process. So, that then animal doesn't really go to waste. It is able to feed myself, my family, my friends, even people that I'll never meet whenever I donate the meat to some programs that we have here in Pennsylvania.
Yeah. What are some common misconceptions about hunting in the context of conservation?
One is that most state agencies do not receive tax money from the general public. They're most, and I say most because there are a few that it's all the agencies have been lumped together, so they get some. But for example, the Pennsylvania Game Commission and the Pennsylvania Fish and Boat Commission, they're two separate agencies here in our state, and they are funded through license sales, hunting license sales and fishing license sales, respectively, and then through taxation of those hunting and fishing products. So the people that are partaking in these activities are the ones that are funding everything that those two agencies do. The other thing that I would say is a real big misconception is that hunters are just out for blood. That we're just, we're getting a thrill out of killing animals. That's the only reason we're out there is just this big massacre.
Yeah.
And listen, there's always some crazy people out there, right? So I'm sure there's a couple of them out there that's what that draws them to it. But the vast majority of hunters that I've met, that I've interacted with, they're hunting for a purpose. And typically that purpose is either to obtain food or to take part in the conservation process, right? Like, I'm giving money to agencies to help with conservation. I'm giving money to organizations that I support that are conservation organizations. And then I'm taking part in this process that needs to happen because of the way modern society is, of taking animals off the landscape. There's just not enough room for as many animals as we have.
Yeah. And Jason, in United States, mainly within the school and the school curriculum, does conservation related to hunting is taught or discussed?
Not really. We It's not, it might be mentioned here or there in the sort of public school, K through 12 public school that we have. You might have a couple teachers, in a few districts that might broach that subject because they themselves are hunters or things like that. I myself, as a teacher, actually do talk about conservation in my culinary class of all things, because I have them cook with venison in the room. But before we do that, I sort of give them the history of hunting from as far back as we know it, tens of thousands of years, and all the way up through like conservation and the way modern society sort of works with the hunting aspect of it, so that they just understand, where this meat came from. I also do the same thing with the food industry. Like, we go through talking about where food comes from. Like, you have this beef, it didn't just magically appear ground up under plastic in the grocery store, right? Like, there's a process that it goes
Especially
through.
with little ones. It's hard to explain.
Yeah. Yes, it is. But it's important to understand where your food comes from. And,
it is.
My goal is not to get people upset about where their food comes from.
Yeah.
It's just that if you're informed, then you can make an informed decision on your own.
Yeah. And what's the first impression with your students?
Typically, so I teach in a little bit of a rural district here. So I always have a handful that have either been hunting or know a hunter and have had venison before, and they typically like it. I take the easy way out. I have them make tacos. If you can make tacos out of any meat and it's going to taste great,
Yeah.
right? So I cheat a little bit there, but their first impression is pretty much, hey, I want to try it, and then, hey, this is pretty good. I don't know that I've ever convinced a student, not that I'm trying to convince them,
Mhm.
but I don't know that I've ever had a student that's like, hey, okay, now I want to start hunting because of this. But my goal isn't to create a bunch of new
Yeah.
hunters. My goal is to create allies, because we only have about 2% of our population are hunters. So if we want support, if we want to be able to do what we want to do, we need the general public support to allow us to have this privilege to be able to go out on the landscape.
Yeah. Cities are growing and the pressure on our natural spaces come with that. Jason, you've seen this firsthand. How does expanding urban areas, including sports facilities, threaten wildlife and natural habitats?
Well, I mean, yeah, I have seen it firsthand. Just by loss of area, right? As these cities expand, and when we put these facilities in,
Mhm.
you have more parking that needs to be there. You need more roads, so you're going to have an impact there from just more driving, more people on the road. So vehicle impacts, but also if you expand a city or housing around the city and take out 100 acres, 200 acres, that is going to have an impact, because that's less food, that's less space for the animal, that's less water, that's less shelter for them in bad weather. Where I'm really seeing it here in Western Pennsylvania is the transformation of farms to housing
Mm.
developments, right? Um, so you have a 2, 3, 400 acre farm that, while it was a working farm, it still supported wildlife. It still had vegetation on the ground. It was undeveloped. Wildlife were free to move on and off of it for the most part.
Mm.
Sometimes the hunters aren't happy about that because they're eating some of their crops, but it's that's part of the
Yeah.
trade-off. Well, once you get rid of all of that working land and then turn it into a lawn with houses, those animals aren't able to utilize
Yeah.
that space. And we can say, like, some people would like to say that, well, I still see deer coming into my yard. Okay, there's some, but it's not just the bigger animals. It's the songbirds, it's the mice, it's the voles that dig around in the dirt that would normally be there but now can't be, because this 2,500 square foot house is now sitting in the place of whatever might have been there before.
Yeah. And what step can communities and individuals take to mitigate the effects of urbanization on wildlife?
Well, we've heard a lot about green spaces, right? People talk about green spaces and what they uh, what they do well for you know people, but we need to create green spaces that aren't just for human use, that are a mixed use, right? So like, I think about a lot of the parks that we have here. They have these perfectly manicured lawns,
Lawns.
basically this grass,
Mm.
and that any monoculture is not going to be good for wildlife. So if we can have, instead of building this, housing plan on the entire property, let's leave some areas in there that are interconnected, that you can have trails on them, right? That aren't paved, they're not asphalt, they're just dirt trails, or even a gravel trail, that has trees still around there, right? That has wildflowers, that these animals are able to move back and forth. Because a lot of times that might be one of the biggest things, is we're cutting animals off in their travel path. And this is especially a big thing about migration corridors in the West, with mule deer and elk. Is we've put interstates through, and we didn't realize, back when we did it, because we didn't
Mm.
know that in the wintertime, mule deer are up here in the mountains, and in the summertime, or I'm sorry, in the summertime, they're up here in the
Mountains.
mountains. In the wintertime, they're down here in the valleys to get
Mm.
food. Well, if you put a big interstate through the middle of it, they can't get
Yeah.
there, right,
Yeah.
safely. So just providing, and just really trying to be strategic in how we use our land and what we leave there and what we modify so that wildlife can still take advantage of the area.
Yeah, yeah. Hunting and fishing can seem daunting for those who didn't grow up with it, but it doesn't have to be. Jason, what would you say to someone curious but unsure?
The easiest thing to do if you're curious would be to go on YouTube and watch TV shows like The Meat Eater or Fresh Tracks with Randy Newberg. These kind of TV shows showcase how to get into it,
Mm,
right? They show you that it's not, they're putting a half hour episode out, 30 minutes, 25 minutes, whatever it is with commercials. And the actual shot or interaction with that animal, they only have for maybe 2 minutes. The rest of it is how they found the animal, preparation they needed before they hunted, recipes made at the end, right? Like it's talking about everything that goes into it that takes up the vast majority of time. I wrote an article years ago about how I sat on a tree in a tree stand in archery season in
mm,
Pennsylvania for over 96 hours before I shot a deer. 96 hours is a long time, right? So I spend the majority of my time not actually killing, but
mm,
actually enjoying nature and what's around me. So I'd say that'd be the first thing is check out YouTube. But the other thing is, and this is something that as hunters, I feel like we need to get better at. We need to we need to publicize that we are hunters. We need to let our family and friends know, and not just that we're hunters, but that we're willing to help, right? So I've done that with my coworkers. I've said, hey, if you want to learn how to hunt, come on over. I'll help you. And I have a good friend now that wasn't a friend, but he was just a coworker. That now, he's been hunting for 3 years. He's been successful. He enjoys it.
mhm,
If you talk to your neighbors, your friends, your coworkers, eventually you're going to find someone who hunts. And if you express interest in it, they're going to show you pictures, they're going to tell you stories. Next thing you know, you can just go and walk with them, and just to see what it's like. And I'll be the first to say, hunting, fishing, both of them, not for everyone, right? Not everyone wants to get blood on their hands.
yeah.
Not everyone wants to touch the slimy fish. But if you go and understand the process, then at least you know whether it's for you or not, right? If you're just sort of staying off in the background, you never really get to experience it, and you never know, is this something I really want to do?
Mm. And in America, to start hunting, do you need to get a license? Do you need to take a course,
Yes.
like let's say a basic course?
Yeah, so every state has their version of a hunter education
Mhm,
course. You have to take it at some point. I'll speak to Pennsylvania just because I'm a hunter trapper education instructor, so I know how the process works. The year that you turn 12, or anytime after that, you have to take this course. It's a 1 day course. It's very basic.
mhm,
So it's from like eight, it's typically in person about 8 to 4 o'clock, or you can take it online. Now we have an online version. It's very basic. It goes over uh, some conservation information, goes over ethics, goes over the importance of laws, and talks a ton about safety with these firearms that we're going to be using, or a bow and arrow. You have to pass this. You have to pass the test at the end, and then at that point, you can buy a
mm,
license. Um, the hunting license you can buy online. You can go to a sporting goods store. You can go to Walmart and you can buy your license. Once you take that course in whatever state you're in, that is that's good. You can then buy a license after you buy that first one for your state. You can buy a license in any other state for a general hunting license. Some states, especially the ones out west, Montana, Colorado, they require additional courses for you to take. So, for example, I've taken a bow hunting course. Talks a lot about the ethics of bow hunting and safety. Once I took that, then I can buy a archery tag in one of those western
mhm,
states. Here in Pennsylvania, once you pass that initial course, you can buy a hunting license or a trapping license. But if you are choosing to trap with what's called a snare, which is sort of like a cable trap,
mhm,
because there's some intricacies on that, and especially the ethics behind it, you have to take a separate fur trapping course just so that you know how to use that cable restraint or that snare.
Yeah. Yeah. Great. Let me shift to a different topic than hunting and fishing, but it's linked to the nature. For a lot of people, recharging means taking a yoga class or trying to meditate. But for me, nothing compares to the feeling of being out in nature. When I'm outdoors, whether hiking, fishing, or just walking through the woods, I can truly leave everything behind and stop thinking about the daily grind. Jason, I'm curious if you've experienced something similar.
Yeah, man, you and me, we're the same. There is nothing more freeing for me than being outside in nature, watching squirrels,
Hmm.
songbirds, deer, even just the leaves, right, falling out of a tree. It's getting to be fall here in Pennsylvania, and some leaves are already starting to fall. So that is definitely a recharge thing for me, is to get outside and feel that breeze on the back of my neck. Um, it I was a college athlete. I did a lot of working out, and
Hmm.
while that's a good stress relief, it's nothing compared to sitting in the woods. I will say there's one caveat to
Hmm.
that. You got to put your cell phone away. Um, you know, 20, 28 years ago, whenever I started hunting, there were no real cell phones, right? They didn't really exist. So, you know, it was easy to get away, right? Because
Hmm.
no one could really get a hold of you anyways. Now with that phone, right there in your pocket, it's hard to pull yourself away
To
from social
disconnect, yeah.
media and things, right? But I've noticed when I've taken that phone and put it, somewhere I can't get to it, right, in my backpack or something like that. Um, it seems just like stress just melts away, right? Like almost instantly, and stays off for a
Hmm.
long period of time. So I noticed that if I haven't been up to our family property, that's about 2 hours away. If I haven't been there in a month and a half, 2 months, like I start getting a little stir crazy, right? Like cabin fever. And it's not even that I'm just staying in my house, I'm doing
Hmm.
things. It's just, I need that release. I need that ability to, uh, you know, decompress. And nature is probably the best way to decompress that we have.
It is. It is. For me, nature is, especially where we are in Sweden, in the archipelago, nature has this divine healing power. It's it. And for me, and I'm still in the sports business since now 20 plus years, and I've tried it. I did meditation, I've did yoga and things, and I just cannot switch my mind just for a couple of minutes. But the minute I go out there with my dogs, and family as well, weekends or even during the holidays and stuff like that. It's yeah. Sometimes I have no word to describe it. It has this power. It's like the minute you connect with nature, yeah, it's amazing. It's just amazing. Yeah.
Yeah, and COVID really hammered that point home for a lot
Mhm.
of people. That being outside, being outdoors was one of the few things you could do, right? Because you could distance yourself from people.
Yeah.
So we had a lot of people that here in the United States that went to state parks, national parks, just did things outside, and study after study, over the last 4 years have been coming out and saying how good that is mentally to be outdoors in the wilderness of some kind, right? Even if it is just a park, but the further away from modern society and the trappings of that you can get, the better it's going to be for your mental state.
Yeah. Yeah. Fully agree with you. Yeah, let's go back to conservation. And at the end of the day, conservation is it just about protecting wildlife? It's about preserving a way of life. Jason, let's wrap up with this. Why is it important for everyone, not just outdoor enthusiasts, to care about conservation?
If I've learned anything in my 38 years in life when it comes to conservation, it's that once it's gone, it's gone. There's no getting it back. It's very hard to rewild an area. And not only is it hard, but it takes a very long time to bring that back. A property not far from where I live was timbered
Mm.
about 15 years
Mm.
ago, and the company that owned that property did it because they wanted to build a office space there. They had to do the timbering, even though they didn't plan on building anytime soon. They had to cut the trees down because we had some bats that's where the bats
Mm.
lived in the summertime, and they were a vulnerable bat species here in Pennsylvania. But if they cut the trees down during the wintertime when the bats were in the caves, nearby caves, the bats would find new homes. Um, that property has sat vacant ever since they've done
Yeah.
that. It's always been vacant. The trees that have been regrowing there are, you know, 15 years old, so they're maybe 20 feet tall. Uh, it's going to take another 40 or 50 years to replace the type of trees that were there.
Mm.
The size of the trees and the amount of trees that were there, the trees that could support the wildlife that it supported. Now, since it's staying vacant and trees are growing, there's still some wildlife that's utilizing that area. It's just different. Um, Once you build a building, I mean, it goes away, right? I mean, nature will take it back if you abandon it, but it takes decades, if not centuries, to rebuild what is lost. We are just now in the Allegheny National Forest here in Pennsylvania. It was almost completely clear cut back in the late 1800s, early 1900s. And in the 1930s, the Civilian Conservation Corps actually replanted hundreds of thousands of
Mm.
trees over these hundreds of thousands of acres, millions of trees. We are just now, almost 100 years later, seeing that forest coming back to half of what it was before those trees were cut. It takes so long for nature to rejuvenate itself that once it's gone, it's
It's
gone.
gone. Yeah.
So, if you're not an outdoors person, that's fine. But realize that once that tree's cut down, once that building is built, you're in your lifetime, you're never going to see it as good as it was on the day that that tree was cut
Mm.
down.
How can individuals contribute to conservation efforts daily, even if they're not out in the wild every weekend?
There's a lot of different ways. I mean, there's volunteers. You can volunteer for all kinds of
Mm.
organizations. You can just give money to organizations if that's what you would rather do. And there really is an organization out there for everyone. I'll just talk about the ones that I know here in the United States. That this isn't even the ones that are all over the world, but we have organizations that are just about deer, that are just about pheasant, just about quail. We have the Sierra Club, which supports a lot of
Mm.
natural resources. The organizations that are out there are um, so varied that whatever it is that you're into, you can help. Um, you know, and that's sort of like, I guess, on a national scale, but even on just a local scale, there's a lot of local conservation organizations that you can be a part of, that you can help out, that you can volunteer. And I know that for us, we have local chapters of some of the organizations that I'm a member
Mm.
of, and we do just garbage cleanups. We'll go to a public land site and we'll clean up garbage. This spring, I took my 3-year-old son and we went to the Allegheny National Forest, and he watched. But we ripped out a fence that was there that shouldn't be
Yeah.
there,
Yeah.
right? So there's a lot you can do there, but what I feel is the most effective thing you can do, that requires the very minimal effort, is contacting your politicians, right? Your local politicians. We have state senators and House members in the United States. We have national federal senators and House members. When these bills come up that impact the natural world, call them and tell them that they should either support it or they should not
Mm.
support it. That I've become very close with a lot of our with my local state representatives because I contact them so much, right? Like I have one of them, I can walk to her office and I'm there every week, like just talking to her, or her staff. And she might be sick of me, but it's important.
You,
They have told us that it's important to hear from their
yeah.
constituents. Otherwise, they don't know exactly how they should go. They're just going to go
Hmm.
with what they feel like. And actually, that just played out, this past month in the state of Florida. The state of Florida, they were going to convert a whole lot of state land that was very wild into parks that people could use and golf courses. And while that would have benefited some, that wouldn't have benefited all as much as the natural
Hmm.
state was. And once, the word got out that the state officials were trying to go through with this, the public, they were not happy, and they went after, and said like, hey, don't, you cannot do this, we don't support this. And now they're not doing it. So use your voice in a respectful way, and tell them how they should vote or how they should support certain bills, and it's going to go a long way.
Yeah, great. Jason, now it's time for our lightning round. You ready for a speedy Q&A?
All right, sounds good.
Let's go. What's your favorite place in the wild and why?
My family property in northwestern Pennsylvania, just because I've been going there since I was 2.
Yeah, so you're really attached to that.
Yes, but 100%.
Who has been your biggest influence in conservation?
uh, my grandfather,
Hmm.
he's the one that purchased the property. It's about 70 acres that we have, and you know, between him and my dad, they got me outside a lot. Because my grandfather bought the property, I don't have the money to buy more.
Hmm.
So what can I do to give back? And that's create habitat on the property, make the property better when I'm gone than whenever I received it.
Yeah. What's the most memorable wildlife encounter you've had?
When I was probably 4 or 5 years old, at our cabin, we had a bear, 3 bears that would come
Hmm.
in to eat out of our deer feeder, which you're not supposed to do, but that was a different time. And this bear, my dad had thrown a pear towards this bear, and it got stuck up in the branches. So the bear decided to get up and walk towards the pear. That landed much closer to me and my grandfather than was intended, and he got probably about 30 yards away. And to see this big 250-pound bear 30 yards away, just eating this pear and then walk away, it especially at 5 years old, that thing looked like it was the size of a semi truck.
If you could conserve one species, which which would be and why?
Ooh, just one. Um, um, I'm going to say elk.
Hmm.
The Rocky Mountain elk that we have, if we go with current ones, they're just majestic. They're huge. This time of year, they're in their rut, and the males are bugling, and it's awesome to see and hear elk in their natural habitat.
Yeah. What's your goal to outdoor activity when you need to recharge?
What's my goal? Just to give myself time to think. A lot of people go to church to sort of recharge and have conversations and pray. And it's I've always said the outdoors is my
Hmm.
church. That's where I talk to God. That's where He gives me some advice. That's where I have time to just mellow in my thoughts and try to make sure I'm making the best decisions, and even sometimes realize things are out of my control.
Yeah. What has been the most rewarding moment for you in this journey?
Um, it's probably getting my son interested in the outdoors. He's 3, and he wants to go to camp all the time, and I love that because I want to go to camp
Hmm.
too. And he always wants to be outside picking up sticks, throwing sticks. Acorns are falling here in Western Pennsylvania right now, and he just loves to pick them up and throw them. And the fact that he loves being outside and he likes seeing deer and wildlife, and like looks at me and says like that was cool, like that's been the most rewarding part for sure.
Yeah. Which leader, past or present, do you admire the most?
Theodore Roosevelt, hands down. um, if it wasn't for him, the entire conservation system we have now, which I admit isn't perfect, but the one that we have now here in North America, we wouldn't have it without him. Founding member of the Boone and Crockett Club, established the Forest Service, National Forest, established Yosemite National Park. Just the things that he was able to do as president have had such lasting effects on this nation in such a positive way.
Great. One piece of good advice for our listeners on any topic.
Get outside and put your phone away. Seriously, go for a walk and put your phone away. I see a lot of people on hiking trails. They still have their phones, they're listening to music, they're scrolling social media as they're hiking. Like, that's not disconnecting. We need to disconnect. You need to recenter yourself, and the only way to do that is to put your phone away.
Great. Jason, thank you very much.
Hey, I appreciate it. Thanks, Sid.
In today's episode, we explored the rich history of conservation in America, the critical role that activities like hunting and fishing play, and the growing challenges posed by urbanization. Jason Crighton didn't just share his knowledge, he shared his passion, making it clear that conservation isn't just a fight for the wild, it's a fight for our future. Whether you're a seasoned outdoor fan or just starting to think about these issues, this conversation is packed with insights that will inspire you to get involved. Thanks for tuning in to the Pre-Zero Sports Talk podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, visit prezerosportstalk.com for more in-depth content, expert insight, and access to our entire podcast library. Don't miss out on future episodes. Explore the world of sports, conservation, community, innovation, sustainability, and more at prezerosportstalk.com. Stay informed, stay inspired.